What's up, breathing people? We're about to get into the podcast, but I wanted to let you know that if you want to watch a shorter video where we talk about the same topic, there's a link in the description below. What's up, breathing people? Welcome back. Today, I'm joined by my wife, Brittany, and we're talking about the importance of communication in a Christian marriage relationship.
Yes.
So this is something that I'm really excited to talk about because this is something that we have struggled at the most in our marriage. And I feel like everybody has the strongest voice on the thing that they struggled with the most, which kind of makes sense, right?
Makes
like
sense.
If you were like a super overweight person and then you got super in shape,
Yeah.
you have the loudest, most impactful voice on the subject because of the transformation.
Yes.
And I feel that way about our communication. I would not say we are a 400-pound fitness wonder where we're, $180 now, but like we're losing weight.
Yes.
We're losing weight and we're getting to that in shape place in our communication. I think it's good to start with the struggle and just kind of giving some context to our struggle with communication.
Yeah.
So that people realize that they're not alone, number one. And then also, it's something that you can work on. Like it's something that you actually can fix through doing work on that thing, just like fitness.
Yeah. I think it's important to know that once you are married, hopefully you found this out a little bit when you're dating and engaged, but when you're married, you don't realize how much you need to work on your communication. And I just want to put that out there because I think it's easy for people to think that they don't have a problem with that. Like they might struggle to be like, why is this so hard?
Right.
And it's because you don't have to communicate at this level when you're not married.
Right.
Because you don't have to.
Right.
Why should you?
There's not this ever-present person that you have to fill conversation with as you pass them in the room.
Yes.
Like that person usually isn't there.
Right.
And now you're in this position where you just exist in this realm where they're always there.
Because their life is now part of your life.
Yeah.
And your life is part of theirs. And before, it's your own life. And you're making decisions for yourself. And it affects other people, but it's mostly about you. You don't have to ask anybody.
Yeah.
So,
but this is something though where going back to our communication, we didn't do a ton of work on this prior to marriage.
No.
This was definitely something that we struggled with in dating.
Mm-hmm.
Was kind of a known thing.
It was known.
we joked about it. But it was one of those things that we said, hey, it's gonna come into our marriage and we'll fix it there.
Yeah.
Not the best approach. There definitely should have been more counseling. There should have been more guidance from people that are ahead of us, just experience-wise.
Right.
And saying, hey, was there anything that you did to work on your communication to have a more lasting marriage?
Right.
And we didn't do that. We decided, hey, let's do it while we're together in the same space and having to constantly be with that person.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And when you struggle with communication, sometimes you don't even realize what you're struggling with. Like, that's probably sounds silly, but it's true because you don't realize why you're struggling or you don't realize why that person isn't getting it. And if you don't have, like you said, you don't have the wisdom from others who have gone through it and you don't have the tools and the knowledge to know how do I become a better communicator? Why is this so difficult?
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to just struggle for a while.
Yeah.
Because for us now, we're able to identify it because we've struggled with it for so long and we've learned tools along the way and more tools just recently.
Yeah.
And so we're able to now identify, oh, that's why I had trouble with that. is because I was always assuming this of you,
Yeah.
and I didn't even know I was assuming this of you. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
So,
Well, and that's a great place to start. We carry with us into our marriages the communication strategies, habits, just the way even we speak comes into our marriage relationship
Yeah.
from how we grew up.
yeah.
And being aware of that is so important as a first step
hmm
to changing it.
Being aware that sometimes that's not normal too.
Right.
Because sometimes you go into
Right.
this relationship thinking the way I communicate is the right way.
Right.
This is the normal way. This
Right.
is what I grew up. Everybody communicates like this.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you're bringing it into a relationship where that other person thinks the same thing about their upbringing probably. And so then you have to figure it out from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's super important to be aware. It's super important to know that your way of doing things isn't the way of doing things in every aspect of your life, but especially here in
Mhm.
communication. So that was one thing that we really had to work through early on
Yeah.
in our marriage was, okay, I know that, and I'm a very kind of discerning person.
Mhm.
I'm a very attention to detail person. So I knew a lot of the ways that my family communicated that I didn't want to communicate in my family.
Right. Right.
I knew some ways that I saw your family communicate that I knew
Mhm.
I didn't want to communicate
Yeah.
in our family.
hmm
And that was helpful because it was able to start the conversation and be like, hey, were you aware?
Right.
And like a lot of times you could be aware of the ways in which my family communicated that you didn't want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, cool, I see it too.
hmm
Let's work on not communicating in that way.
Yeah.
You know, it's harder when you're not aware maybe in your own family and you have to bring that up and you're like, huh,
Yeah.
I never saw that before.
hmm
Changing those things are much more difficult.
It really is. I think for me, and I'm still getting better at this, but realizing and figuring out how to communicate thoughts and not just keep them in, I
Yeah.
think was like a big obstacle for me and with us. And that's a hard thing to become aware of, first of all. So
Mhm.
hopefully this will help people become aware. But then learn how to communicate. Because when you always just process stuff in your head and you don't process it out loud with other people, that's something that is really important in a marriage.
Yeah.
But it's something you have to practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
get better at.
And we'll keep talking about maybe the ways in which we stunk at communication
Yeah.
as we continue to talk about the importance of it.
Yeah.
But I think that leads right into kind of the heart of why communication is so important in a marriage relationship is you are valuing the other person by engaging
Yeah.
in communication,
Yes.
proper communication,
Right.
loving communication,
hmm
you know? So you have thoughts and everyone has thoughts.
Yeah.
That's what makes everyone valuable.
Right.
Everyone is unique. Everyone has their own opinions, thoughts,
Mhm.
dreams, hopes. That's the things that make up who that person is and the value of that person.
Right.
But it's only realized in a marriage relationship if it's given opportunity to be expressed.
Mm.
So that's really why communication is so important because it allows for that value to be displayed.
Yeah.
And if it's mutual, if it's back and forth, then you're just in this dance of valuing the other
Yes.
person through your communication.
Right.
Even the hard communication, even the arguments, even the debates, even the
Yes.
things that the negotiations that you go through in communication, you're still valuing the other person and their thoughts and their opinions
Right.
and their values.
I love that because you can't care for someone without that, and you have to work through even those arguments.
Yeah.
Because that's a part of caring for them, to say you're worth my time to figure this out, even though we're both annoyed in it or whatever it is. Yeah.
It's so worth your time
Yeah.
to communicate. And I think that is a highlight in our relationship that, and I'm not saying in a positive light, I mean a highlight of what we've struggled with is making sure that we are giving people that time and that space for them to communicate. Making sure that we are safe to receive and we are safe to give.
Yeah.
That's something that I really struggled with because my personality is so, you have a problem, I want to fix it.
Yeah.
That's how I try to be helpful.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it makes me unsafe for you to express just in general.
Right.
Just express.
Right.
I was going to say thoughts and things like that, but like any expression. You might not want an opinion. You might not want a response from me. But a lot of times I struggle to just allow the space.
Yeah. And that's why communication is so important too, is being able to openly talk back and forth to just understand each other too, because you are going to say the wrong thing sometimes. You are going to, I'm not talking about just you, like me too, like both of us, you're going to say the wrong thing sometimes. And so to be able to still have that trust with that person to say, what did you mean by that? Because when you said that, I took it this way and it hurt, it made me mad or whatever it is. So if you can have a healthy enough relationship where you can actually approach that person with that thing that was said, to me, that's like optimal healthy, because you're always going to mess up. There's going to be times where you mess up and not even know it. And not even know it. And so to have that openness and communication to ask each other what you meant by that, or that kind of response or whatever doesn't go well with you, is really important.
It is really important. We haven't gone to the book in a while, and I just I was looking at this verse today, and I think it just kind of encapsulates well the two dynamics in communication. Communication can be used to destroy somebody, or it can be used to heal somebody. It can be used to uplift somebody. It can be used to build up somebody. This is Proverbs, pretty good book. 12, and I'm going to be reading from verse 18. It says, "Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." And I just think that's the aim that we really want to be going for in our communication, and the awareness level that needs to rise in us to know if our words are cutting like a sword.
Yes.
Even like I'm saying with not being safe enough for you to just express yourself without me having to come in and fix it or give you a solution or tell you how you're wrong or whatever I would do. That was cutting like a sword. That wasn't bringing healing to what you were expressing to me.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying it's just so crucial for us to be aware of how our communication, what action it's having in the relationship.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's so true. How would you say is the best way to kind of discern that? Like, you have the gift of discernment, but how do you discern that what you're saying is breaking your marriage instead of healing it?
The only way to actually discern that is through communicating with that person.
Yeah.
And actually having those touch points where you're saying, hey, how are we doing?
Yeah.
Hey, how are you feeling? Hey, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
Without those questions being asked, I don't really think there is discernment in marriage that can really cut through the conversation, like that can cut through and decipher what's going on in the relationship without actual communication in place.
Yeah.
I don't think that's real.
I mean, I would agree.
Because there's so much of a connection with that person that you're married to. it's different than any other relationship. There's definitely relationships that are more acquaintance-like, that I can discern where this person is at and where we're at in our relationship, that I can't in a marriage. It's just a different dynamic.
And you probably shouldn't.
Because that's not the place for discernment. Communication is the place in marriage.
Right.
Or communication is the key in marriage to actually discerning where you're at.
Right.
And I think just as a first sort of point for how to have better communication in your marriage relationship, and this goes along with what we've been talking about, is how skilled are you in the art of listening?
Yes, let's talk about that.
How much do you care for that person? Is it enough for you to stop talking? And I've really had to work on this personally. This has been a huge struggle of mine, because I'm constantly thinking, I'm constantly, brainstorming things. I just got a million thoughts going through my brain at once. And when you talk, I want to just talk too.
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is so much fun. I just want to talk too.
It's funny.
But through development, through learning, I've come to realize that listening is so close to loving. Like, a lot of people have written about listening, like the skill of listening to a person in relationships, as being almost synonymous with an expression of love for that person.
Yeah.
And so just that context has given me the ability to, when you're speaking, say in my mind, I love this person, and because I love this person, I'm going to give them the gift of listening.
Yeah.
And I've made it like an actual mantra that I'm speaking to myself as we're in conversation. I'm still listening to what you're saying.
That's cool.
But how I don't speak while you're talking, how I don't interrupt you, how I don't just cut right to the solution, is actually saying in my brain, I'm giving her a gift right now by keeping my mouth shut. And I have to repeat this to myself, and that's okay. You're not giving up an aspect of yourself that is costly.
Yeah.
You're giving a gift to that other person. And it's been something that I'm still working at. I might still give my fix for the situations if I feel like it's necessary, depending on the context of the conversation. But while you're expressing yourself, I've really tried to work on not talking.
Yeah.
I've tried to work on just giving that space for the expression.
And I appreciate that. I see that. But like, it is hard for anyone, though. You're saying you're working on it.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it's hard for me. It's hard for anyone. Maybe not just to be quiet, because I can be quiet. I don't mind letting people speak. But listening doesn't involve just being quiet. It's like you were saying, in actually caring about what they're saying.
Right.
So when they speak, you're listening not to say your next thing. You're listening not to just give a fix, right? You're listening to understand the heart of what they're talking about.
Right.
And, when you think of people in your life that have maybe influenced you in some way, that have really listened to you and spoken to you from that understanding of what you were saying, is so meaningful.
Yeah.
And like, I can think of certain like mentors that I've had who have been really good at that. And that makes you it always takes you aback when somebody listens to you that well.
Yeah.
You're almost like, oh,
genuine
listening.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, maybe I have something important. You're like, is this really important? What am I saying is important?
Exactly.
And It's so powerful. And I know I struggle with that kind of listening where I'm like fully engaged. I turn off my thoughts because that's where I struggle. Like I'm listening, but at the same time, I'm like thinking about something else that I want to do, that I want to say. Like I'm listening, but I'm also kind of like have some other thoughts here.
Yeah.
But that real listening to your spouse is so powerful. And that's where you get to know them and then can actually speak into their life.
Mm-hmm.
When you're only half listening or not really listening, it's just the breeze.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that person's going to feel that.
And it goes back to that value that you're bestowing on that person to be listened to. You know, like you said, that genuine listening where that person wasn't talking. When they responded, they were basically repeating back to you what you had said. And they're like, and that does it. It forms the thoughts in your mind that what I expressed had value. And in turn,
I have value.
I have value. Exactly. Exactly. And that's what you're doing in those contexts where you listen to the other person and you are present with them in listening. One thing that I've realized too is I don't have to answer everything. I think I have this like, I think a lot of people do, where they have this like God complex where you really feel like whatever conversation you engage in, you have to have an answer in.
Yes.
It's okay to just, you don't know everything.
Yeah.
And live in that. You're a human. There are so many issues that I see people speaking on in the news and in culture and things like that. And I'm like, you have no clue what's going on in these situations. Like, especially when people talk about other people, I'm like, you don't know them. This is complete speculation. This is literally you just like mind dumping.
The first thing that comes to your mind, you're like,
and putting it out there like this is relevant information. And it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And it's the same way in your marriage relationship. You don't have to give your wife or give your husband an answer for everything. Just listen sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what builds the trust.
Yeah.
And that's what will slowly, I mean, there's other things involved, but that's what will slowly build safety as well. For you to know, I can say anything.
Right.
And I'm not going to be attacked.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be.
It's just going to be received.
Humiliated.
Right.
It's going to be received. If I'm way off and I need correction, I'm going to get it kindly.
Yeah. It is really important. And the thing too to know about real genuine listening, and we're already touching on it, is your ability to express back to that person that they were heard.
Yeah.
That's so important. And that's something that I never did growing up. I never heard somebody and either repeated back to them what they said for clarification.
Yeah.
Like, hey, so you said this. Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
And I also never just kind of spoke it back to them so they know I heard them.
Yes.
And I just think that is such a beautiful thing that I missed in my communication growing up.
Yes.
I was always, while someone was talking, taught to have an answer for them afterwards.
Yeah.
That's how you move the conversation forward. And that was my job growing up.
Right.
You know, don't be a conversation pooper. Keep the conversation going. So while the person's talking, be like, okay, they're talking about this subject. I have this knowledge point about that subject. Even if it's not really relevant to the conversation, I'll put it in there just to kind of keep the conversation going. Maybe it's interesting. Maybe they'll like me because of it. These are the thoughts going through my brain. But I could have had such deep and maybe more meaningful conversations with somebody if I just listened to what they had to say. Like I was thinking about this too. There's so many times that I wish I could like express knowledge that I had on something and someone was just like, wow. Like, wouldn't that be so cool?
That would be cool.
If like you said something and someone was just like, That's really interesting.
Yeah. I love this because
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I didn't know you were going to keep going.
No, I just am thinking, I'm like, it's so cool with like, if a person did that, you would feel so awesome.
Yeah.
Like, it would feel so cool
Mhm.
that you said something and the person just was like, wow, that's meaningful.
Yeah.
It would make me feel so good.
It does.
And if it would make me feel so good, why wouldn't I want to do that for other people? And I think you kind of were saying that when you were saying that people listen to you well, you felt so valuable. And I think that is the best, when someone is able to, through their listening, make you feel so good.
Yeah.
Make you feel so good. And I have had people that are just really good listeners in my life. And it's interesting, like, it's not one of those points that you sit around aspiring to replicate. Like, you're not like, how do I get better at listening? Like, it's never something that I just sit around and like wonder about getting better at.
Even though I would want to get better at that. But it's not something we think about.
It's something that makes me feel really good when people do it. For some reason, it just doesn't, like, I don't know. It's not flashy.
Yes.
It's not.
You feel like you have to fill the space.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. I was laughing at you sharing how you feel like you always need to give a point, because mine is like kind of like the opposite. I feel the same way, that I have to like say something, but I don't know what to say. I'm just panicking. My brain is like, panic, panic, panic. I'm not listening to anything you say because I don't know what to say, right? But why do I feel that way? Like, why couldn't I? I think it's harder with strangers. Sometimes it's easier to listen with friends and your spouse because you know them. And so that like quiet space is okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, I should practice this with everybody, because even somebody that I don't know, how much more will I actually have to say if I stop freaking out in my head and just listen to them and then ask a valuable question about what they just said?
Right.
Instead of being like, oh no, what do I say?
Yeah.
Like, what does that say about you? That says that you think about yourself too much, I guess, right? Because I'm trying to figure out, what do I say instead of being, this person is in front of me. How do I care for them? I can listen to them.
Yeah.
I can inquire about what they just spoke. And to bring it back to marriage, how valuable is that to do that in your marriage relationship on a consistent basis?
Yeah. It's so cool that we've two sides of the same coin are coming to understanding about this thing called listening.
Yep.
And the importance of it. So what I love about that is that it doesn't matter what your upbringing was. It doesn't matter if you're like me or if you're like Brittany. It doesn't matter. You can shift wherever you're at to be a person that is more competent in listening.
Yeah.
And your listening abilities, and doing that authentically and doing that well. And you really only get to authenticity in your listening through practice.
Yes.
So that's like another thing too that I think is super important to like let people know about, is as you're changing these aspects of your communication, you have to just know that the other person needs to be informed that you're doing these things. Because if you don't inform that person, it's going to be weird and they're going to wonder what's going on. You know, you really need to make sure that other person's either involved or at least aware that you're trying to work on this aspect of your communication.
That's so important because, like you said, it will be weird. And it will just be easier if you communicate that with them, because your spouse is probably in a habit of compensating in whatever way you were doing it wrong, right? And they're probably in like this never-ending circle of, when he does this, I do this. And then that probably affects the other person back. And it's probably just like this back and forth, like I do this when he does this, and then he does this and I do this.
Yeah.
And so to know that your spouse is trying to change, it'd be good if if the spouse tries to change as well.
Right.
Because then you can both begin
allows for that change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can both begin to implement healthier ways of communicating.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say is like the next step? So if I guess we talked about how would you know that you're communicating poorly, right? You can only really know by asking, right? Or they're kind of obvious, the cues that you're communicating poorly, right? Like you're probably yelling at each other or doing the silent treatment or angry at each other a lot. So those are kind of obvious signs. Right. But so what would you say would be the first steps that somebody should take if they realize, okay, my strategy for communicating is failing. So what do I need to do? What steps do I need to take to begin to communicate well? Listening being one.
Listening being one.
Telling the person that you're going to try to communicate better, Right.
I think that's step one. Be like, hey, I know our communication hasn't been the best. I'm going to work on that.
Yeah.
And I'll let you know of the ways in which I'm going to try and work on that. Yeah. Because you can say you're going to work on your communication and that's meaningless until it actually happens. Yes. So if you actually develop some skills that you want to implement into your communication, as you do it, you need to communicate again.
Yeah.
Hey, remember when I said that I wanted to work on my communication and developing that? I'm going to be implementing something and trying it out and practicing it.
Yes.
And I just want to make you aware so that either you can do it with me or you can just be aware when it's happening so it's not a big deal.
Right.
So I would say that first. Then, listening is probably number one as the tool to learn, because if you listen to that person, you'll actually understand that person. Because most of us just don't understand what the other person maybe is arguing. We don't understand what the person is actually feeling. And the only way to gain understanding is through knowledge. And that requires you to receive.
Yeah.
So listening is such an important tool for developing your communication. And then after that, I would say, and we've kind of touched on this already in the conversation, but to make it a little more clear, is, are you clarifying with your spouse assumptions that you have in the relationship? Or on top of that, are you clarifying expectations you have of them?
Yes.
Both of those things, assumptions and expectations, need clarity in the relationship.
Yeah.
For good communication to be happening.
Yeah.
A lot of communication that happens in marriages is diluted by lack of clarity.
Yes.
And it's funny, it's diluted by lack of clarity and muddied by assumptions that are thrown into this pool. You know, you have you really don't know a lot because of your lack of clarity, but then you throw in all of these assumptions because of your lack of clarity, that you're just muddying the waters of your ability to actually communicate well with that other person. And what I mean by this, to just make it real tangible, is a lot of times we think things about the other person, or we think the other person is thinking certain things. And if you don't clarify with them, is that true? Is that truth? You want truth in your relationship, because if there's no truth in the relationship, you're not living in reality. You're living in unreality, and that's not where God would have you to live. And that doesn't lend itself to good, healthy communication in your marriage. So making sure that you are, so wherever there is a lack of truth, that's where assumptions live. And assumptions aren't truth. They are assumptions. The only assumptions that are true are assumptions that are agreed upon. Because that's when you know they're true.
Yes, because you've communicated about it.
Because you asked the question. I think that you think this. Is that true? And if they answer yes, now you have truth as a basis for which to have conversation.
Yeah.
And now your conversations have a foundation that is solid and that is built on truth.
Yeah.
So I would say clarifying assumptions and expectations is the second thing that people really need to start working on.
And just to add in on the clarifying and the assumptions, this is the one that I think can be hidden, that you cannot know about. Like remember when we were talking in the beginning, how sometimes you might not realize that you're bad at communicating? Well, it might be because you have a lot of assumptions that you don't even know that you have.
Right.
And I say that because this is the hardest one for me, is the assumptions. I'm still learning to clarify my assumptions. And this was really hard, like when we were first married, because I didn't even know that I had all these assumptions. Like I just thought that you thought things and that's why you did certain things. Like I'm making up the reasons why you did such and such.
Yeah.
Because he feels this, this, and this, and he doesn't like this, this, and this. I never asked you if you felt that way. I never asked you if that's why you did that. I just was like, well, that's why. And now I'm going to orient myself and my communication around that assumption. But it took me so long to realize I even was doing that.
Yeah.
And so
but
I want to emphasize, I want to encourage, right, the practicing, right? Like this is not something, at least for me, it's not something that you just get overnight.
Yeah. Yeah.
You practice it. Just when you realize that you're getting upset or you're realize that, you know, your spouse is mad or upset or just whatever it is that you're like, why? Ask the question. Like just ask, be like, why, you know, did you do that? Or if you, as you get better at it, as you get better at practicing, be like, I think that you're mad because I did that, but I don't know why. Are you mad because I did that? And then that opens up them to say yes or no or clarify that assumption. And it's so important. But I just wanted to put that in there because I think it sounds easy when you're saying it, but it's really not. You have to get better at listening and then get better at knowing what's going on in your head and assessing, is that something that he told me or is that something that I'm just thinking?
Right.
Because if I'm just thinking it and I never heard my spouse say it, it might not be true. Yeah. If he didn't say it, it might not be true.
Yeah.
And
I think, like you said, practice is such an important role in developing this skill.
Yeah.
In developing the ability to clarify. Like you said, it's not something you just, and now I clarify everything. It's like, no. It's a skill because just like with listening, it's going to be awkward at first. But if you really want a marriage built on a foundation of truth, you'll get a little awkward for the relationship. And one of the things that I think would really help, and even in the context of, you know, your struggles with it, clarify everything. Clarify everything.
Yeah. It's very difficult, but important.
But it's one of those things you need, if you value the other person, that's where we're going to come back to, because that's at the heart of why your communication needs to improve in a marriage relationship, is because you value that person. Here's ways in which you can show it.
Yes.
If you can say, I value you all day long, but these types of skills that improve your communication is actually going to demonstrate it. So clarifying everything and making sure you're not thinking anything that person is not thinking, because that is a lie. And now that is between you in the relationship.
Yeah.
You don't want anything to exist between you in the relationship, and a lie based on an assumption that's not clear is a dividing line in that relationship.
And when you get better at these things that you just said, and there isn't anything in between you, that's when I'm not saying it gets easy, but that's when it gets easier, because then you'll be able to notice right away, this just was said, or this happened, or there's something in between us, and it'll be easier to communicate about it.
Right.
Because like you were saying in the beginning, how when there's assumptions and what was the other one you said?
Expectations.
When expectations aren't clarified, there's like kind of that fogginess and mud, right? But when you've gotten good at communicating and practiced, you clear that away. And so you can notice right away, something's not right here.
Yeah.
And we're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
We're going to talk it through. And that is the beauty. I think that's the beautiful thing about marriage. And I think that's how it's supposed to be, is you're that close with that person that you can know right away, okay, something's not right.
Yeah.
And then you can work it out.
Can we go back to one of the things that you talked about earlier in the podcast about how you struggled with expressing your own thoughts, or even felt that they were important enough to be expressed?
Yeah.
This, I think, might be the next thing that people should work on when improving their communication. How well do you know yourself? How well do you know how you feel about things? How well are you able to articulate what you feel is valuable? How well are you able to see where you're at in the relationship? I think clarity on what's going on inside of you and who you are is going to bring a lot of health to the communication. I think that's been something that's really helped me recently, is the ability to know exactly what I'm feeling in certain situations, to know exactly what I value in certain situations. Like, I can't actually bring and express and have you listen if I don't actually know what I'm bringing. Because I could just bring words. And that's another thing. A lot of us live in untruth, in unreality sometimes, when we're not clear on what we actually care about.
Yes.
When we're not clear on who we actually are. Because we might be a version that was created in our upbringing, but is not true to who we are. That was just some character that we made to survive in whatever household we came up in.
Right.
But that's not actually who we are.
Right.
And in that marriage relationship, we need to really work on being clear on who we are, on what we value, on what we hold dear to ourselves, so that it can be clearly expressed to that other person who's ready and willing to receive what we're expressing.
That's cool.
But if we don't know ourselves, though, and we really haven't sat down and worked that out, what we bring to our communication is going to be faulty.
Yeah.
So I think that's another important thing, to make sure that you're doing work to really bring clarity to yourself so that you're true in the relationship.
And I just want to add to that. I think that is true. And I don't know. Tell me what you think about this.
Okay.
I don't know if you can get there without the listening and clarifying assumptions.
So developing the first two.
Yeah, I don't know if you're that mixed up in your head. You need time to say the jumbled, faulty things that aren't true and hear them come out of your mouth and think, I don't really know if that's true. That's going to start you thinking.
Right.
And to clarify those assumptions, to realize, why do I think that you're angry at me for this?
Yeah.
I don't know why I think that about you. And so maybe you'll give me some clarity on how you actually felt. And then I can be like, okay, so what does that say about me?
Right.
What is going on in my heart and in my mind that I thought that reaction was, anger towards me, whatever it is. But it's almost all combined, because when you're isolated and you're not communicating well, as much as you think your thoughts are congruent, they're probably not. Like, it's only in that being heard and clarifying your assumptions that you begin to understand yourself.
Yep.
You begin to have the freedom to express yourself and figure out what you actually do think and how you actually do feel. And that's another beautiful thing about marriage is this whole communicating is not easy, but it really does help you grow into the person that you're supposed to be, because I don't think you can fully do that without safe people around you, and your spouse should be that safest person.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you think
I love that. When you go down this path, though, make sure the other person knows.
Yeah.
Like if you're like, I got to work something out and I really need another person to bounce this off of, make sure they know. Because there's also a lot of self-work that happens out loud that the other person is now burdened by because they weren't brought into the mental process of what this person is trying to do.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm just working this out. I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm going to kind of say some things out loud. Don't take them personally.
Right.
This is me just trying to work out what's going on in my brain.
Right.
Now I know to kind of sit back and relax.
Right.
Like I'm not being attacked, or I'm not being told I'm a idiot, or told I'm a, I don't know, whatever you're working out in your head that's possibly false. I just want to know that you're working it out.
Right.
So that I can relax and not take it so personally immediately.
Yes. Yes.
That's all I would say to that. I think it's great to work out stuff with your spouse. I think that would greatly improve your communication abilities.
Right.
To work that out with your spouse.
And I wouldn't say that it's something that you only work out with your spouse. Like if you practice,
no.
like that's not healthy either to burden your spouse with all that. But practice listening and clarifying assumptions just in your relationships in general is going to help you clarify your own thoughts and feelings.
The majority of the work that I was talking about doing for ourselves is for ourselves, not for you and your spouse.
Right.
I just think it'll improve your communication with your spouse.
Right.
But a lot of that work is for you.
Yes.
For you to do. I do see a lot of people that do what you're talking about in an unhealthy way.
Right.
Where they're.
Can you explain what that looks like?
So they're working out how they feel on something, and it could be something about their own relationship, or it could be relationships outside of their marriage relationship. And they work that out with their husbands. And they tell them everything.
Okay.
And they express all the feelings. And they also have parameters in their mind for what the husband should give them in those conversations in terms of like how much assistance and how caring they should be, because then it could spin off into another communication problem where, hey, I was trying to talk to my husband, or I was talking to I don't mean to put that on the woman, but you know, I was trying to talk to my spouse about this thing and they didn't.
Right.
Whoa. You are working this out. Not
Don't
you
put
and
it on
them.
Yeah. Well, to clarify, what I am saying is, I mean, I have myself as the reference point. So I know how I work things out is through prayer, through reading the Bible, and journaling. Because when I journal, I'm able to write what's really true. Because as you begin to write something that's not true, you can't even write it. You're just like, that's not right. That's not it. And you're able to kind of really write out what you're thinking. But I say that the listening and clarifying assumptions, practicing that along with it is helpful, because sometimes your spouse will clarify assumptions with you that you need, or when you clarify assumptions with them, it helps things click in your brain.
Okay.
Is what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
Like through our relationship, you've questioned things, or when I've said things out loud, you've spoken into it, and I'm able to like think, oh yeah, like things happen in my head, like light bulbs go off in my head that I don't think I would have had if I hadn't said it out loud.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
So when I say that, I'm not saying like you just are like, okay, I'm going to lay it all out and you need to, you know, fix me or make it better. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm saying practice these things, and that will also help you as you do your self-work.
Yeah. Can I offer like a simple tool? I guess it would be the way to say it. A helpful expression. Like, hey, can I bounce this off of you?
Mm.
That's like such a disarming way to start
Right.
what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Like an expression of a feeling, an expression of a thought, an expression of a situation.
If you know that that's what you're doing. The times that it's happened for me, I didn't know.
That's the awareness that needs to
Right.
really arise more in our lives, so that we can do that properly. Because I just, I do worry about too much of that could be unhealthy.
Okay.
In the communication.
Right.
Without proper parameters for the conversation.
So in all circumstances, I can't say it. In all circumstances, if you're aware that you need to bounce this off, you want to use that kind of term. Like, can I bounce this off of you? Okay.
Yeah. So that we're not reckless
right.
with our words, so that they cut like a sword.
Right.
Because there's definitely been times where, you know, you've said certain things to me and you had no malicious intent behind them, but either the way that they were said or what the topic was about, like it hurt, you know? And we just have to be careful.
Yeah.
Maybe if there was context beforehand,
right,
of what we were going to be talking about, there could have been preparation
right.
on my end to prepare for this so that I could receive you better. I could help you better. I could bounce things back and forth off you better. You know, like
Right.
whatever the
Right.
context needed for good, healthy communication.
Right.
I think that would help. Knowing where you're at in the communication is so important.
What do you mean by that?
So knowing what you're doing at any said time in your communication is so important. Like, hey, I want to talk about the way that I feel about this.
Oh,
is really
okay.
important for that other person to know we're in the feeling space.
Okay.
Like, I really want to share some dreams that I had. I really want to share some thoughts about this thing.
So you're almost clarifying what you're about to talk about.
Yeah, just so that person is at ease, because when you're so emotion filled and you come into a conversation cold, that person is automatically and rightfully so going to have their defenses up.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what you're
Right.
doing.
Right.
Like, you could just be on the attack right now.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I really want chocolate. Like, oh my gosh, my heart is racing, you know, but
yeah.
it wasn't that big of a deal, but I didn't know that.
Right.
You
right.
could have been like, hey, do you know something I really want right now?
Yeah.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
You know, I really want chocolate.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, and that's a simple example. And I know that emotions are a huge part of the communication that we do, which is why it's difficult to clarify context beforehand. But it would help so much if people knew where they were at in the conversation.
Right.
I just think that would greatly assist the health and even like the productivity of the conversation.
Yeah.
You know, like what it's actually producing in the relationship. I think it would really help for that too. So listening, clarifying expectations and assumptions, and making sure that you truly understand you.
Yeah.
And doing that work to make sure you're bringing you to the conversation.
Right.
And that's been a thing in our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I've really struggled to know who I am, still struggle.
Right.
Because, I grew up a pastor's kid. In that world, you're whoever you need to be for whoever's in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So I wore a lot of masks. I hid a lot of things. And if you do that for an extended period of time, you don't know who you are anymore. And it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's really tough, but I'm doing work to discover myself again. And that's something that you completely can do. You're never too far gone to learn who you are.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing that work. You kind of had a similar but different story. And
I just to add in,
go.
I'm actually curious to know what you're gonna say, but
no, I'd rather you tell it than me talk about who you are.
I feel like you always have really good insight about me that sometimes I don't even like.
But that's part of the problem.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go ahead and say it. So for me, I feel like the hardest part for me is to know what I actually want.
Right.
And I don't know where that developed because there are certain things where I know that I want.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other areas where I'm like, I don't actually know what I want.
Right.
So how do you share your dreams and desires when you don't know?
Yeah. But where do wants and desires and dreams come from?
Where?
From your values. What do you value most?
Right.
And that's multiple values. It doesn't have to be one thing.
Right.
But values are the things that are core to who we are.
Right.
So if we can figure in this context or in this context, I value this.
Right.
That will inform what we want either to happen or we want to receive.
Right.
Or we want to give.
Right.
In all of those different contexts. So I think it's just super important when you're doing that self-work to look at that question.
Yeah, that's good.
And you might need to do that contextually. Like you might need to do that as a practice in multiple contexts. So like, okay, I don't really know how I feel about this situation. And maybe it's deeper. I don't know what I actually value in this situation. So you need to do some work to get to the core of what you value in this situation.
And then from there, you kind of know how to proceed.
And then you know what to ask for that you want.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So when you come to the conversation with your spouse, you're able to communicate wants and desires and dreams because you've done the work to figure out what you value.
Yeah.
That's what makes you valuable.
Yes.
That's what makes you valuable is what you value.
Right. Interesting. I like that. I never heard it said that way.
Me neither.
I got to think on that. I think that's true though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope so. Cause I'm just riffing. But so those things, what other things can you think of that really would help somebody in their marriage communication?
All right. So we said
listening.
First saying that you're working on it. Listening, clarifying assumptions and expectations, working on yourself, knowing what you value. I mean, I really do think it's those are the main ones. And just giving yourself, I guess what I would say is how you implement those things. Giving yourself grace to know that you're practicing. So you're gonna mess up sometimes. Don't beat yourself down. Just try again. Just keep trying again.
Yeah.
And to give your spouse grace too. Because they're trying their best.
Yeah.
Or at least hopefully they are.
Yeah.
But to realize that you're human, they're human. Be willing to learn, be willing to receive instruction, I think is the best way to proceed with communicating so you don't become arrogant in any way.
Yeah. Let's read some more proverb. I'm just like looking at this while you were speaking, and I'm just like, Proverbs is so good.
It's so good.
It's so good. From the fruit of his lips, a man is filled with good things. As surely as the work of his hands rewards him. The way of the fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. A fool shows his annoyance at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult, giving grace. A truthful witness gives honest testimony, but a false witness tells lies. Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment.
Wow.
I'll stop there.
That's good.
Build your communication on a foundation of truth and reality.
Yeah.
And that takes practice.
Yeah.
That takes work. That takes you raising the level of your awareness of your shortcomings.
Yes.
For the purpose of giving value to your spouse.
Yes. And valuing them.
And that should be your pursuit in marriage.
Yeah. And so I think one other thing that's important is, so these are kind of simple, even though they're not hard. Even though they're hard to implement, but as you were reading that, it made me think of, so that's the ideal example, right? What you just read, but you might realize that you're not there yet.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to even start that practicing. And it made me think, like, what does somebody need to do if they realize, okay, I'm definitely not communicating like that. So how do I go from here to there? And I think the first step would be when I don't know how you are struggling to communicate, but whatever it is, maybe just take like a timeout or like take a pause when you're communicating with your spouse or when you're about to communicate your spouse. If you are full of negative emotion, to just kind of be like, I don't need to say what I want to say right now. I'm just going to figure out what I value.
Yeah.
I'm going to figure out how I feel right now. I'm going to figure out why I feel this way so that when I come to speak to my spouse, I can clarify these assumptions. I can maybe clarify expectations that I had and weren't met. And I can come with a level head and not full of emotion.
Yeah.
To blow the head off of my spouse. And I would say that's not like a way of, it's the same way of communicating that we were just talking about, but it's kind of like the trick when you're not used to communicating this way. Because it's just pause.
Yeah.
Maybe you even need a day or two.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Because starting something new is always hard, but especially like communicating is so natural.
Yeah.
The way we're used to communicating is so natural. It's really hard to even start practicing these things. Mm-hmm. And so on top of practicing them, maybe and trying to stop your old way of communicating, you just need to take a pause before trying, before practicing. Take a pause before practicing. Pause, practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I think it's a great place to wrap it up. I actually just heard that the other day in terms of, I think it was like a Q&A someone was doing and they were like, what's kind of the best, I don't know, rule or tip or something like that for marriage. And people were like, I forget who was talking, but they were like, pausing. Yeah. So wow. I think you're right on the money with that one, because that's going to stop you from doing things that express the opposite of what you actually feel about the person you're married to.
Yeah.
You love them, so you say. You value them, so you say. How much will it cause you to pause so that you can communicate with them in a loving, valuable way?
Yeah.
I think that's so key. So, all right. Thanks everybody for watching. We will see you on the next podcast. If you're still here, make sure that you like, subscribe. If you're listening to this podcast, make sure you leave us a review on iTunes, follow us on Spotify. We love you all. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.